On today's show, has Lamar Stevens put himself in the Cavs starting lineup going forward? We'll chat about that and more on today's show. Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, the music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. I'm Chris Manning. Find me on various social media platforms at CWM. You can find Evan Dammarell, the proprietor of Down Euclid, on various social media platforms at Am Not Evan as well. Today's show, segment 1, Lamar Stevens as the 5th member of the Cavs starting lineup. Segment 2, we're going to look at Jetty Osman this year versus last year. What's different? What is the same? What he is kind of right now coming off of his 2 standout performances. And then segment 3, we're going to look ahead to Cavs Blazers, the Cavs Wednesday night game, their Thanksgiving Eve game. A programming note for that one, Evan is the night of. I will be doing a solo recap to repay Evan for covering for me while I was on vacation. So let's start with Lamar Stevens.
Well, wait, Chris,
What?
Chris, quick question for you. What were you doing this afternoon at First Energy Stadium in your car?
I was not at First Energy Stadium in my car.
That's what the police want you to think.
Okay, I don't know what you're referring to. I am just...
You didn't see the news of somebody who did donuts in the middle of First Energy Stadium's field?
No, I've been very just like in my own little bubble today. It's been quite nice.
Well, let's talk Cavs.
Yeah. So Evan, with Lamar Stevens, he has been starting for a couple of games now. It happens before Caris LeVert sprains his ankle. They make this change. When this happened, what was said about this? So when they are publicly discussing this, I want to put some context on this for the listeners. How did the Cavs discuss this? How did JB Bickerstaff discuss putting Lamar in the starting 5?
So JB approached Caris about it. He did hint at the fact, just to wind it back a little bit, after the Cavs lost to the Bucks in Milwaukee, that they do need to have some type of change. It's just a lot of bad juju around this losing streak the Cavs had in general. Just a lot of things weren't working. Things just weren't working on the end of the floor. I think just, as Chris had smartly pointed out, you're starting to see the defensive issues of playing Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and Caris LeVert together at the same time. And JD stayed true to his word. He did make a wholesale change to the starting lineup and the bench unit. And JB shared his insight on it, where he thinks it's best to maximize Caris LeVert as a bench scorer, because playing alongside Donovan and Darius wasn't going to get him the touches required in order to kind of get him going offensively and maybe make him look a little bit more effective as an offensive threat out there for Cleveland. And more than anything, it's just Lamar Stevens has the ability to defend well. JB said he likes the fact, at least, that they can kind of switch 3 through 5 a little bit when Jared Allen is comfortable defending in space and based on the matchups as well. But it gives them a little bit of versatility just in terms of positional defense and just how they want to go about things. I know for a fact that I think if Dean Wade was available, Dean Wade would be starting over Lamar Stevens. But Stevens has played well enough up to this point that he had earned minutes in the rotation to begin with. I think he had earned minutes in general, and I think just when you're looking for another answer, clearly is an Isaac Okoro right now, so you turn to Lamar Stevens and see what you have. It's a bigger wing who's more of a 4, but is forced to play the 3, can switch between everybody. And then JB said privately the conversations were good. I think Caris LeVert just telling JB full stop, whatever you need to do to help this team win is just I think the right mentality to have, where the guys are kind of checking their egos at the door a little bit. Of course, players do care about their stats at the end of the day at some points in one way or another, but it's an interesting dialogue. It's an interesting way to go about it, and it's been largely effective. The Cavs have won 3 games in a row since they put Lamar Stevens in the starting lineup. I believe that's not a full wholesale way to look at things, just because the game against the Hornets was so close, the game against the Heat was such a blowout, and the Hawks was kind of a bit of a litmus test, and Stevens played well. It's just, I'm sure Chris will jump into it a little bit. The numbers and the metrics don't necessarily bear out, or it just doesn't match what the eye test is telling you with Stevens out there as the starting 3 for the Cavs. But you can tell it has shifted the balance a little bit. And unfortunately, with LeVert spraining his ankle, it kind of mitigates the change where you want to get him going more so offensively. But That's, I think, a little bit easier of a bridge to cross once you get him back in the rotation in the swing of things, because at the end of the day, Karis LeVert isn't your A1 priority in getting him going on offense. It's still Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, and Allen, and if you get Karis LeVert going before regular season ends, that's great, but I think you want to just make some wholesale changes to maybe balance out the defense a little bit, and also just more than anything, just try and maybe reset what was a kind of ugly losing skid.
What I think works about it is that Lamar, I think, knows how to like function. We talked about this on the recap episode last night, but he will cut. He will dart in from the wing. He will the defensive stuff is kind of more standard with him, but he knows how to at least try to make himself functional on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Him being willing to just shoot some threes, it means that even though he's a worse 3-point shooter than Okoro, like teams are at least like he takes out 3 late in that Charlotte game. Gordon Hayward closed out on him. He makes that corner 3 on Sunday. He's getting closed down, and teams are not like face guarding him and trying to take him out and really limit his shot opportunities. I think they will still feel good if the shot they're giving up is a Lamar Stevens 3, but he's at least making them like react to a little bit. The tricky thing is I think the spacing just get cramped, and the Dean Wade part of this would be sort of interesting to consider, or if they go to that maybe when Dean is healthy. Statistically, it is 86 possessions so far with Lamar plus Garland, Mobley, Allen, Mitchell. It's -7 per 100 possessions, scoring 109.3 per 100, giving up 116.3 per 100. I think where I end up with the 7 is that I think it is like fine for the moment. I think like LeVert wasn't perfect with the starters either. It was -4.3 per 100. He kind of has cooled off, and obviously his injury now, but he was awesome to start the year, and then it's not been the same really since that Boston game in some ways. There hasn't been a possession this year where it's Dean Wade plus those other 4 guys. So we don't know what that looks like, but I would suspect that would look good as well. My ultimate answer is sort of like a cop-out, and that's I wonder if the starter for the best version of this Cavs team is maybe he's just still not on the roster, is what I kind of come down to. And you're kind of just patching holes as you go through the season, right?
I don't think that's necessarily a cop-out. I think that's kind of the correct answer. You look at things, I believe Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype noted that the Cavs, at least when they had conversations for Jay Crowder, Jetty Osman is the name that came up, maybe that's an avenue you explore. I'm sure there's other options out there too if you're Cleveland. Javonte Green is a guy like that I keep kind of looking at just for the Bulls, even though he's been playing pretty good basketball lately. And in our group chat with Danny Cunningham, you had floated the idea of Royce O'Neal, if the Nets just fall apart at the seams. There probably are realistic paths and options for the Cavs to maybe find that answer outside of their roster. But if they're looking internally, yeah, LeVert has cooled off quite a bit. I think there's just not a big enough sample size with Stevens in the starting 5 or just in the lineups in general because he seldom played at the beginning of the season that you really can't say yeah, this is the clear-cut answer for the Cavs in terms of what they need to get and what they need to do in terms of the starting 3. And yeah, it was an issue even before Donovan Mitchell came to town, because depending on how you felt about Lauri Markkanen, yes, it worked for what the Cavs are doing, but is that really your permanent answer for your starting 3, or is he more of a 4 who is kind of covering himself as a 3 and being covered by Evan Mobley and Jared Allen defensively? So it was always an issue with the Cavs. It's been an issue since, frankly, LeBron left town for the second time, and it's not an easy one to answer because functional wings that provide what Cleveland needs are a very rare commodity in today's NBA, and they don't come across or become available very often. So the Cavs kind of have to probably work internally, maybe get a little weird with it, and that's why you see guys like Dean Wade or Lamar Stevens who are natural 4s playing the 3, or you don't see guys like Jetty Osman who has the size to play the 3 but just not the defensive capabilities to play the 3 to kind of do what JB Bickerstaff needs, or Karis LeVert was the answer at first just because LeVert played so well to start the season. There isn't a clear-cut answer, and I feel like this isn't going to be the last time we have this conversation about who is the permanent starting answer at the 3. And like you said, and I agree with you, it's not a cop-out at the end of the day. I think it's the correct answer. The clear-cut answer just isn't on this roster, and the Cavs have to be comfortable with maybe making some shifts if things just aren't working at this current juncture.
Yes. All right. After the break, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the aforementioned Cedi Osman. Maybe hit on if he's an option to start. I think there's some concerns there, but also just what he's been this year versus last as a rotation piece for the Cavs. But Evan, you're first going to tell everyone about our friends at Turo.
You are absolutely correct. Today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and it's also coming soon to Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find an affordable economy car if you're on a budget and need to just get from A to B. You can even test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on and see how it fits your everyday life before you maybe think about taking over Twitter. Many Turo hosts can deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions may apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com.
All right, back here on the Locked On Cavs podcast, I'm Chris Manning. That's Evan Dammarell. Let's look at Jetty Osman here. So, Evan, I think to just build on what we discussed with Lamar, I think if Jetty were to be someone you look at as starting three, I think there's still the same way, some of the same structural issues you would have with LeVert. You're just not adding the shooting is nice and kind of differentiates him from some of these other guys, but you'd have some of the defensive concerns that you would have with LeVert as well, and just based on what Jetty has been. But he has been obviously a bit up and down. I think he's a role player. That's just sort of what role players are. But he's having a solid enough year. His usage is a bit down. Makes sense that Mitchell's here and doing a bunch of stuff. His assists, his turnover numbers are very consistent. 40.6% on three so far on just under 4 attempts per game. At 38.2 on catch and shoot threes, that's a great number. 62.5% on pull-ups. It's only a pull-up every other. It's a pull-up every other game, so it's not really meaningful. But he's been blistering on those. You just expect that to crater at some point. I think kind of the most interesting part of this is that we're coming off these two really really good Jetty games where he plays a bunch. He's awesome. He plays 37 minutes against Miami. He plays 20, basically 29 against Atlanta. He played 7 minutes the game before in a 2 overtime game against the Hornets. It's really hard to only play 7 minutes in a 2 overtime game when you've played. And then the game before that, he plays 13. So his minutes are a little bit of you ride the wave a little bit. And I think that's just what he kind of has settled into. It's you're gonna put if he's feeling it and you can ride him, it's great. And if he's not, I think you will see JB pull back on that just a little bit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I called him controlled chaos on Monday's show, where that's how you just kind of have to go about it. If Cedi Osman's off, I think he just has a shorter leash compared to years past, where he was the starting three the year after LeBron left, and then you saw him kind of be phased out. Eventually, when Isaac Okoro came back, and then eventually he was really phased out as a starting option at the 3 spot when Larry Markkinen came into the fold. And then this year, he is kind of scrapping and clawing for his minutes. He did say post-game that he kind of understands why, and JD point blank said Jetty wanted to prove that he deserves minutes in this rotation. He had to prove to the coaching staff that he deserves consistent minutes. And I think right now, if you're Jetty Osman, you want to maximize the opportunity you have. And I know we talked on Monday's show about his contract options and just what the Cavs can kind of do with that as well, and just some of the creativity or flexibility Cleveland could possibly have with that in that regard. Definitely interesting to kind of think about and break down in the nitty gritty and the minutia there. But at the end of the day, Jetty Osman has been good. Jetty Osman has been bad. I think we got good Jetty Osman to start the season. I wonder if maybe Donovan Mitchell just kind of playing out of his gourd just kind of mitigated some of the other more glaring concerns at times with him out there. And then also the Cavs just kind of have bigger fish to fry at the same time too, because they don't need to be placating minutes and shots in the rotation just exclusively for Jetty Osman. But like you said, if he's able to fit in and not fit out, as one LeBron James would say, it's a good thing. But if he's just not working that night, or if he's just getting roasted defensively, or if he plays with happy feet, which is just something he's played with no matter what level of basketball, whether it's NBA or international or EuroLeague, he's just never been really a great defender. You just kind of figure out what you have with him. And like I said, Jackson Flickinger wrote a really good piece about why Osman is kind of beneficial to this rotation. But at the same time, JB Bickerstaff's also a creature of habit, and he has a certain archetype of what he wants and expects from his players. And it's first and foremost guys who just play defense, and he isn't really concerned with three-point shooting or relying heavily on analytics, as he's at war with the computers, as Chris Manning would say. But and again, no knock on JB, but there are other guys on this roster that maybe provide more of what JB Bickerstaff is looking for out of a player that Jetty Osman doesn't. So like when he's off, he's probably more comfortable turning to guys like a Lamar Stevens, or maybe not before the season, but before the season, or not this season, but before the season, Isaac Okoro, and just guys like that ilk instead.
Yeah, I mean, he's turned to Okoro the last couple of games, which is sort of an interesting kind of thing. And I'm curious to see like what this rotation will kind of look like when Rubio comes back, because I think if Rubio's healthy, like Rubio's going to play, and I think like the guy he kind of most replaces is LeVert, and that's an interesting discussion in a lot of ways.
Rubio replaces LeVert in the rotation, or like takes minutes from LeVert?
No, I'm just saying skill set wise. I'm saying like what he does and what he provides. It's like he doesn't play like Okoro. He doesn't play like Stevens. He doesn't play like Dean Wade. He doesn't really play like Jetty. What he does is play like big as like a guard off of another guard, handles the ball, and is really smart. And it's like that's kind of what they've asked LeVert to do in some ways, right? Like, yeah, it's just like that's where like I see Rubio sort of like pushing. Like, okay, like then what happens there? That I don't think it's like a 1-to-1 minutes replacement. I just see it as like that he replaces, if he's good and he's right, he will, I think, kind of like function in what LeVert has been asked to do in some ways. And I think that's kind of interesting. But on Jetty,
interesting.
What do you, Evan? This year, the Cavs are on. This is 708 possessions. Some of these lineups are very good. Some of them are bad. It's still relatively early in some of this. Cavs are plus 16.5 per 100 possessions with Jetty on the floor. That's absurd.
The numbers just don't track sometimes.
No, they absolutely don't. Like that's like an absurd. That's just like an absurd thing, and it's like partially because like. There's ones that are like plus 51 per 100, plus 40 per 100. There's one that's like there's like one that's 20 possessions that's like plus 75 per 100, and like that's just bonkers. He's the power forward in that one that's like plus 75 per 100, and that's just like bonkers.
20 rebounds.
Yeah, but like what I think he settled into is like they have put in structure with him in terms of Mitchell. I think this was like what Rubio did last year. And like what I think we hit on a ton with Jetty last year, but I think like Mitchell plus Garland plus Mobley kind of flashing a little more offensive stuff. I mean, LeVert's there as well, and then you let Rubio into it. But like even just Mitchell plus Garland and him kind of being like kind of put into a clear role, it's like he is sort of restrained from like going full Jetty in some ways, and like bad Jetty doesn't really come out as much because like these like restraints are sort of there for him built in place.
No, like saying him going full Jetty is kind of a good way to put it, and I think the Cavs having the offensive pieces where it isn't your one post LeBron, where like the Cavs like, okay, once Kevin Love breaks his foot and George Hill mentally checks out along with Jordan Clarkson, Kyle Korver, and so many others, our only offensive options are Colin Sexton and Jetty Osman, which obviously led to the Cavs getting a top 5 pick that season. And that's no disrespect to Jetty. I think if you look in the optics scheme of it, like the Cavs were able to use a second round pick to carve out a somewhat rotation player, maybe a guy who doesn't necessarily fit what the Cavs need, but he does fit what a lot of teams possibly want and just kind of are looking for in terms of a cheap wing depth option. And if you're Cleveland, maybe you hold on to him a little bit because he is a cheap wing depth option, and that's something you need, especially when you have such an expensive payroll at the top when you're Cleveland. But the numbers, just to go back to that, they surprise me still. I think we need more. Like, it's similar to Lamar Stevens. I think we need more tangible playing time with Jetty out there with the bench units or just with certain lineups in general, just to figure out, like, where does he fit? Where does he work? Where does he doesn't work? And just things like of that ilk as well. And just kind of figure out the next steps from there. And just, I want to ask you this because I'm still, like, mulling over your point about, like, Ricky Rubio coming back. Like right now, I think Jetty and Okoro are just the guys JB's turning to because they're healthy compared to like Kevin Love, and obviously because he has a hairline fracture of his right thumb, and yes, he played the other night against the Hawks, but he really didn't do much of value on the floor when he did play. And eventually, like Dean Wade is going to come back, like he's probable today because it's Wednesday against the Portland Trailblazers. So like Dean Wade's going to come back. You'd assume he gets eased back into the rotation, but like when this Cavs team is healthy. Before we kind of look ahead to Wednesday's game a little bit, I who do you think the starting three is? And do you think, like, between Okoro, Osman, and LeVert, who do you think sees a minute loss when Rubio comes back? Because I think Stevens has carved out a spot, at least in this rotation for the time being.
I wouldn't assume that. I think Okoro, Osman, and Stevens are all to varying degrees sort of at risk of minutes cut. And I think I just wonder if this just ends up being Dean Wade's job.
I think Dean Wade's the starting three. Like, in my heart of hearts, he just makes a lot of sense because he's a low-usage dude who knows what his role is, and he's going to provide spacing to make Mobley and Allen just function a little bit better. And, like, also just spread pick and roll stuff with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland has just, like, been really functional with Dean Wade this year, and something I would encourage the Cavs to continue exploring.
They're just, like, you need shooting off of those two. When you're playing Mobley and Allen together, you just need shooting, and like spacing just at a premium. Like Lamar, I meant to pull this up before. Look at that shot chart. It is just like paint. Like that is what he's doing, and it's like he's been very effective at darting in, getting little floaters, cutting in from the corner, getting layups.
Yeah. And there's like opportunities he's been in the perimeter, like against the Hornets, he had a pretty wide open 3-point attempt, and he ended up pump faking and driving to the basket and not getting fouled by Gordon Hayward. That resulted in the Evan Mobley offensive board and the crazy Darius Garland 3. But like LeVert, similarly to Okoro, has had the opportunities. I just don't think he is fully comfortable taking advantage of all of them.
Yeah, and it's like there's only so much.
Stevens.
Yeah, with Stevens, there's also only so much you can massage some of these kind of realities of his game to kind of figure it out. Okay, we'll be back after this break to dive into the Blazers game. We'll talk about the injury report. We'll talk about the Blazers injury report as well, because there's a big name that is listed as out for Portland. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. For instance, they will have a line up for Cavs Blazers on BetOnline, as well as game props. Right now, the Cavs are also minus 1,800, basically 2-1 favorite to make the playoffs, and Evan Mobley is plus 750 for Defensive Player of the Year. Right now, Evan Mobley has the fourth best odds for Defensive Player of the Year at BetOnline, which I found. That's BetOnline. That's where the game starts. Okay, last segment, Locked on Cavs. Run through this injury report for this Wednesday game. As we're recording this, here is the latest injury report. Kevin Love listed as questionable with that right thumb fracture. Ricky Rubio obviously out. Dean Wade is listed as probable, as Evan mentioned. Dylan Windler out. Oh boy. I get sad every time I think about that. Just what a rough run for that guy. Isaiah Mobley and Mohamed Diakite are in their G League assignments, so they are out. And Karis LeVert is listed as out again with his left ankle sprain. On the Portland side, Josh Hart listed as probable. Damian Lillard, Gary Payton Gary Payton II, both listed as out. Damian Lillard is out with a right soleus strain. So no Dame. Cavs will be significant favorites, I would imagine, in this game. Portland, yeah. Evan comes in at 10-7, 17th in the year in point differential, 17th in offense, 13th in defense. It's the Lillard part of this, though, just kind of limits some of my interest in what we're going to see here, just because I was curious to see, coming off of the Atlanta game, the Cavs have two guards to defend there in Murray and Trey. You get something a little different, a different flavor, different energy in Dame and Anthony Simons. And I'm curious to just see how this looks coming here again.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I am curious to see just like how this functions at the end of the day. I maybe we get a better glimpse of just how the Cavs kind of stack up against a Portland team that does have two, rinse and repeat with Dame and CJ McCollum, but now with Dame and Anthony Simons. But at least just have two dynamic enough guards that provides like a defensive question or competition for the Cavs. And also just kind of like the Blazers are interesting enough where like They do have Jeremy Grant. They do have Nurk out there. They do have a couple of other just interesting guys as well. Like Chauncey Billups is not the best person, but he's a good coach at the end of the day. Like this is an interesting tactical matchup between Bickerstaff and Billups as well. So it's going to be a fun game. It is a little bit softer and a little less exciting, with Dame not out there for the Blazers. But I think if you're the Cavs, like you just try to go in, take care of business, and just maybe shift your focus to Friday's game because you're back in Milwaukee playing the Bucks.
Yeah, you get Milwaukee on Friday, and like I wonder if to some degree, like you maybe like I could see this as like a Kevin Love rest game. Like honestly, like I don't know what his hand's feeling like. We don't really have like a clear, but he played through it the other night. We'll see. I mean, maybe like he takes the night to see just how it feels if you feel like you can do without him, especially if Dean Wade can play. Maybe you can afford that.
So it's interesting because when JB was asked about it, because he went from doubtful to probable in less than 12 hours when the Cavs had first announced that he was going to be at least listed as doubtful because of the thumb injury, and then he went to probable against Miami. And then JB was pressed on it. The Cavs did a walkthrough like maybe like 35, 40 minutes before JB spoke to the media, and they said like they're just going to take Kevin's availability on a day-by-day basis, just see how the thumb's doing. And like I got a good look at him last night prior to the Hawks game, and it's just taped up like crazy, like from the base of the thumb all the way up. It's wrapped completely in black. So it's just a process. I think like a hairline fracture, maybe it is a pain management thing. Maybe it's just trying to play through it. I think the Cavs at this point like are kind of, I wouldn't say desperate, but like they need depth at the 4 spot because all they really have is Evan Mobley and then a kind of haggard Kevin Love, and then you have Lamar Stevens kind of backing him up, and then you have Dean Wade who's coming back too, who scarily enough had an infection in his knee and was dealing with antibiotics. And Bickerstaff also said like Wade, when he does come back, is going to need to be eased back into things. He's needed to kind of play himself back into shape. Like practice opportunities are obviously limited, and I think maybe he'll be on a bit of a minutes restriction just as he gets back because it is the same knee he tore a meniscus in over this like last season. So we'll just see how this goes. I think this is going to be another game where you see the Cavs obviously lean super heavily on Mitchell and Garland, but maybe you see them lean more on Evan Mobley at times too, just because Mobley was kind of passive in the first half against the Hawks and then kind of brought it on strong towards the end of the game and was really impactful, obviously, on both ends of the floor in ways you just kind of can't track on the box score. But maybe this is a game where like you try to get Evan Mobley going a little bit and kind of maybe put some building blocks down to build that confidence up a little bit because he's going to have to handle Giannis on Friday night after the day after Thanksgiving, no less. So more than anything, I think riding the positive wave of a win streak heading into Milwaukee certainly a lot different than riding the down wave of a losing streak when heading into Milwaukee. And I'm now morbidly curious to see what this Cavs team kind of looks like on Friday, and more than anything, what this Bucks team looks like on Friday, because like obviously that's like circled on everyone's calendar. Like that's going to be a marquee matchup between both teams, but just take care of business against Portland. Again, no Dame kind of sucks just as a fan of watching the game and just a fan of watching Damian Lillard play in general, but this should be a pretty winnable game for the Cavs. And you've said overwhelming favorite. I think they're just going to be a favorite in this one.
I think
a strong favorite. I think I would lean towards more. Like I'd feel comfortable putting money down on the Cavs if I was so inclined to do so.
Yeah, I just like no Dame just means like it's on Simons to create like everything, and the Cavs love Garland and Mitchell. Like I think you should like that's a game like if you're the Cavs, no Dame, center. I think in Nurkic you can attack with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Like I think you should have. I think this is like a game you should pretty much win. Okay, we're gonna end here. I'll be back tomorrow for Thanksgiving Eve, recapping Cavs and Blazers. Thanks again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. This episode was produced by Jake Stevens. Now for your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Chris. That's Evan. Thanks again to Jake Stevens. See you tomorrow.